Hey everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of the Intentional Life Podcast. I'm AJ Selby, and this is my wife,
Amy Selby.
And we're here to talk about how adding just an extra layer of intentionality to your life is a minor solution to so many things in life, whether it's your relationships, whether it's your work, your finances, any of those kinds of things. Being intentional makes all the difference. So, and we also, this is where we've started this whole thing with just taking questions. We reached out to a bunch of friends and family and said, hey, we're doing this thing. We want to help people. We want to encourage people. And what are some questions that y'all would want to hear us talk about? And that's what we're doing. We're going to talk about your questions. We're in real quick. Shout out to Zach Ford and his company Enter Square, who this is his beautiful space. We have our friend David here taking care of all of the videos.
Go, David.
And yeah, what's our question today, babe?
Okay. So this first question, technically we have two because they kind of go together a little bit. We'll get to the second one a little later, right?
Okay.
So the first question says, how do you maneuver through making a difficult decision as a married couple, taking into consideration that both of you may have different desires or hesitations, and one may want to move quicker than the other one, like you move at different paces? For instance, I like to make quick decisions and move on, and my husband likes to think about it for a while, so we have to take that into account when we make decisions. Which I thought was a very great question, and one that you definitely have to work through when you get married. It's very practical.
Yeah, I think like the first things first, your opinion is the only one that matters and you're the one that's right. So that's how it goes. Just kidding.
That is not true.
Correct.
I hate it when people say stuff like that.
Men,
no.
Be aware that's not how you love your wife. By saying, this is what we're doing, this is how we're going to do it. And I think, actually, this may be going a different direction than what I originally thought. But unfortunately, I do think that there's a lot of guys that think that in my position as the head of the home and as the leader of the relationship and all of these things, that they think that's how it goes. And that's not the case. We're told, husbands, love your wives as you love yourself, right? And so if that's the case, then we are always to take our spouse into consideration.
Yeah.
I don't know. I know I'm jumping in kind of hot on that, but what are you, what's
it goes
your
the
take?
other way too. It's not just that situation that you were just talking about, which is true. I think a lot of people are taught that they're supposed to navigate it that way. Then there's also like the common, which you kind of joked about at the very beginning, like the common, I guess it's more of a joke in culture that's like the guy's an idiot and the wife has it all together and she knows what's going on and she's going to like move all the pieces. But that always irks me. I'm like, no, yes, wives have wisdom and we have input and we need to have that space. When it's one or the other, it doesn't matter. It irks me because I'm like, no, you have to work together to make this thing work, and to make solid whole decisions in your marriage, you need to be in agreement. And when people have the attitude, or even just in culture, the attitude of like one person in the marriage is a joke and the other one is the one that's controlling everything, I'm like, just stop.
Yeah.
Because that's just not healthy.
Yeah. I think.
And it's not really lifting up either person in the marriage, like either one. Yeah. It's actually kind of a slap in the face to both. So
yeah, I think to really kind of go back and dig, directly into the question, how do you make big decisions together? How do you make difficult decisions together? As believers, the way that Amy and I have navigated this for us has been, when one person has, felt strongly about something, we take it and we submit it to the other person. We don't say, hey, this is what we got to do. It's far more along the lines of, hey, I have a really strong feeling about this. I'm not 100% sure. This is the way I think this should go. I would love if you took some time to think about it, and we come back to it. And that's how Amy and I do it, because in, this person's question, the wife is the one that likes to make a quick decision and move on, and the husband likes to take time to think about it. That's the opposite for us.
We're
And
the
so I
exact
have to be
opposite.
very intentional to where if there's something specific that I'm wanting to talk about with Amy, that I actually have to, I don't know if I want to give away my secrets. You're sitting right here.
We've talked through a lot of this in like figuring out what works for us. So
it's true.
The
And so
chance
really,
that something you're going to say is new to me.
It's
a possibility, but
maybe,
probably not.
but probably not. But for what has worked for us is that I'll go to Amy and I'll tell her, hey, I have this thing. I feel strongly about this. I'd like for us to talk about it. Can we talk about it on this day? And it's like maybe a week later that I'm saying, hey, can we talk about this? It's Monday. Let's talk about this on Friday. I'll remind her and say, hey, have you thought about such and such on Wednesday? And then on Thursday, I'll be like, hey, I'm looking forward to us talking about this tomorrow, to make sure that it stays front of mind and not in like a pestering way. And I don't think you've ever taken it as a pestering way.
No, and that's not a shock to me that you do that, because, well, one, I've seen the pattern, and two, we have talked about that before. Because I get distracted. I do like to ponder things. I like to think through. I like to look at, it's like picking up a box and looking at all the different sides of the box and being like, ooh, whereas I feel like more naturally, like you will look at different angles, but naturally you pick up a box and you go, cool, it's a box, and you put it back down. And I pick up the box and I'm like, cool, what's this side look like? What does that side look like? And that's how I approach decisions. But I can get stuck in A, analysis paralysis, or B, or B, I just get distracted and I forget to think about it. So I do need you to, one, set a time limit. You can only think about it for this long that we agree on. We agree on a time frame. Yeah. But then you do remind me gently, like, hey, please don't forget to think about this. Because we agreed that I would take time to think about it. So, yeah, it's not in a pestering way. It's in a gracious, like, please don't forget that you agreed to think through and talk about it on a certain day.
Yeah. I think sharing that approach actually shows a little more of like what we've had to learn in having to learn each other and how each other processes. I process a lot more quickly. I analyze things in a faster and different way. And oftentimes, just what I've learned from life, and it's not 100% true all the time, but more often than not, my initial gut instinct is the correct option, or maybe is the best option.
Oftentimes, yeah, not all the time, but oftentimes. Or it's like headed in the right direction at least. Right. It may not be fully there, but it's your initial gut reaction is usually headed in the right direction.
Right. And so
which is where like us talking through it and my input helps figure that out. Yeah.
And so I think I started in on this a minute ago, but when it comes to how we live our lives as believers is like we take high value in praying through these decisions together. We'll pray about them individually. We'll pray about them together, whether it has to do with big purchases, whether it has to do with any kind of move, whether it has to do with
job situations.
Jobs.
I mean, anything that's bigger than like
dinner. even how to handle different other things with family or friends or things like that. Like there's, we don't talk about every little thing about every little purchase, which actually, that was a funny thing that Amy used to do. She'd be like, is it okay if I spend $15 on such and such? I'm like, we have money. Just buy the thing. It's fine.
And I think the reason I did that was I wasn't used to sharing money with somebody else. So I was like, wait, this is our money? So are you okay if I spend this on this over here? Are you okay? Which, I mean, we make a budget and we're like, this much is allotted to this and this much is allotted for fun money. And so like I knew I had that, but also in the back of my mind, I'm like, but it's not mine. It's not all mine. Like I want his input. And he was like, stop. Small things, it's fine. Like just
buy the
don't
thing.
ask me about every little thing.
You're not out buying some $300, nail thing for you. It's, you want $15 for
Starbucks and something kind of makeup or something.
I don't know. Yeah. And so we may have talked about this before. If not, we'll definitely talk about it further in depth on this podcast at some point. But it's really important to learn the language of your spouse. Actually, that might have been on a podcast that we did with the Life is Relationships podcast.
Yes, we did.
I think we did that one, where it's so important whether you're engaged or whether you're newly married, or if you've been married for 10 years and you still think your spouse is an alien because you don't understand them somehow. I don't know how you make it that far and not understand your spouse, but how it's so important to understand the language of your spouse and how they process, how they communicate, and being able to interpret their body language and their tone and that kind of stuff. Because I think that's important, not just in being able to communicate with your spouse, but I think that's an important aspect of two becoming one.
Yeah.
In marriage, is that it doesn't mean that y'all all of a sudden, become, completely, telekinetically, connected. As wonderful as that would be, if I could read her brain, Amy, if I could read your mind, holy smokes.
I don't even know what's going on in there half the time. It just goes like this. So I don't even know.
That would, man, that'd be incredible.
That'd be a gift, yes.
It'd be a huge gift.
But then we wouldn't have to work things out and rely on Jesus to help us.
You're not wrong. Anyways,
yeah.
Point being, you have to work on the relationships. You have to learn. You have to figure out your spouse, because it's like a dance. When you're not dancing smoothly, it's clunky and awkward and weird. But once you find the right rhythm and you get in the right step with your spouse, it's a really beautiful thing.
Yeah. And it takes practice. Like, I don't know. I think sometimes we have this idea that even if it's subconsciously back here somewhere, have this idea that like when you get married, you're just automatically like, you're going to get each other. No.
Wrong.
It takes practice. It takes intentionality. It takes like working on it and, not getting discouraged when you're like, how do I not know this yet? How do I not know that you function that way yet? It's like, it's okay. It takes time. People grow and mature and change a little bit throughout the years. So things are always a little bit ebbing and flowing. And
yeah, look, we're 5 years in. We're 5 years in and still figuring this stuff out.
Well, we will be for the next 50 years of our life.
But that's what I mean.
Yeah.
Like,
We've barely gotten in there.
Not like 5 years is like this super long time, but at the same time,
No.
It's like there's a lot that we know about each other and a lot that we're on the same page about. But then there are times where something comes up and it's like, I didn't know that was your perspective on that.
Yeah.
And that's okay. Actually, there's this story that this conversation reminds me of that probably 5 to 7 years ago. I was hanging out with my parents. We were walking somewhere and my mom out of nowhere said something in French.
Oh, I forgot about this.
And
story.
my dad looks at her and goes, I didn't know you spoke French. And she's like, how did you not know this? And great, it's like, my mom's not fluent in French, but like
it's not like she uses it every day.
Right.
But
At one point she went to France on a college trip and spent, a period of time there where long enough to like pick up phrases and stuff. But it was just such a funny interaction. I'm like, you guys have been married like 20 some years. How did you not know she spoke French? And it's just that funny thing where I look forward to those kinds of things of being 20 years in and there being something that pops up. It's like,
You're still discovering stuff.
how have I not known this about you? And it's just fun learning like the continual mysteries
Yeah.
about your spouse.
Yeah.
And so, but yeah.
I think, can we jump into some of the like practical, which I guess everything we've been talking about has been practical, but I have some thoughts.
Yeah. Go for it.
Okay. So I'm just thinking through like, okay, how to learn to make decisions well with your spouse, whether you're newly married or you've been married a while and you just haven't really figured it out yet.
Mhm.
I think a lot of what you were saying is super important. Figure out how do you function? How do you process things? I mean, this person who sent in this question, she already knows, like, my husband likes to take time and I like to move fast. Like, she already knows some of the groundwork, right?
Yeah.
So that's important. Like, you recognize that. And she's already saying, we have to take that into consideration. So I'm like, well, you guys are off to a good start. You already know you have to take that into consideration. That's great. But I think just having, sitting down and having conversations and saying, hey, let's talk through, like, we need to work on how we make decisions together so that we're not getting frustrated, we're not taking so long, like, whatever it is, or jumping the gun, either one, and just talk through what are your preferences? What are your natural tendencies? What have you observed about me? And like vice versa. And don't accuse each other, okay? Don't be like, well, you take your sweet time. Don't be like that. But just being like, hey, well, I've noticed like this pattern when we have decisions that we have to make, or whatever. So talk through that. And then whether you want to write it down or just talk it out, whatever, and figuring out what are the strengths in those and where does that become a weakness. So like, I'll just take what we were talking about us. So your natural tendency is you just want to make a quick decision, move on, just like this woman who sent this question. And then I would like to ponder and think through it. So those are both strengths, but they have weaknesses. Whereas if you don't bring that to me and talk through it, you could make a very jump the gun, irrational decision that could not be for our benefit later. Or even if it turned out to be a good decision for our relationship, not a good thing.
Quick story on that. We literally just had a conversation last night where I was wanting to buy a new gun. And I was like, hey, there's this sale, there's this great thing, and, we can swing it. And then because took it to Amy, we talked about it, she was on board, but it was long enough of a time period from the time that I first found this sale to the time that we had a conversation about it that I realized it was not in our best financial interest.
Yeah, because we have other things that are more priority right now.
Yes.
Yeah. So where mine becomes a weakness is, I kind of mentioned earlier, I can get analysis paralysis. I look at all the angles of the box for too long and I can't decide and I can't figure it out. And I can see the pros and cons of every angle of the decision. I can see all of those. And sometimes I'm like, I don't know which one outweighs the other one. Like, and I'll stay there for a month if I'm not careful.
Right.
And so you need me to slow you down and to bring some thought process into it. And I need you to tell me like, okay, we can't, you have to set a deadline to this. And I need you to hold me accountable to that. So we need each other's strengths to also keep our own strength from becoming a weakness, if that makes any sense. So talking through that with your spouse, figuring that out about each other, and then setting those boundaries, saying what boundaries are going to work for us. Like what you were just saying, like setting a time limit. That honors me by giving me time to think, and it honors you by me not dragging that out.
Yeah.
So it honors both of us. And that's really important. And of course, every situation is different. Some situations are going to lend themselves to, like, you have to make a decision today. And so for the person who needs to ponder, that could be, give me 20 minutes. I need 20 minutes to wrap my head around this, not a week. And it's still a quick decision, but it's not right now in this second, give me an answer, where it's like, my brain's not even catching up yet.
Yeah.
So, it just kind of depends on the situation, but figure out, talk through when you're not in the middle of a decision-making process. Sit down and take the time and talk that through with each other. Figure out how can you support each other in your strengths, and how each of you can best utilize those and honor each other in that. What do you bring to the table? And where are things that maybe you need to grow a little bit? And what are healthy boundaries for that decision-making process? Like, okay, these are the kinds of decisions that are really important for us to talk through. And like these kinds of decisions, like I can spend $50 at Target and not have to ask my husband, but over this amount of money, we need to talk. Like figure out what those boundaries look like too when it comes to financial decisions or whatever, and be like, okay, like for us, we don't make, like it even goes down to our schedule has been nuts the past several months. And we had to look at each other and go, okay, we cannot make another decision. We cannot agree to do another thing, like even down to dinner with friends without talking to the other person, because we have so much jam-packed in our schedule that it might be a small thing, but anything at this point added into our already busy schedule is going to feel like a major thing. So yeah, you just have to talk that through with each other. And then give each other grace because you're figuring it out. So give grace to each other when you hit a bump.
Yeah.
I might have talked around that a little bit too much, but those are kind of my thoughts.
Yeah. And I think
around some of the more practical.
And I think some things that help with making big decisions together as you're both trying to navigate it are the two of you sitting down and being able to talk through and have already predetermined within your marriage and the trajectory of life of what you're looking for. Does this decision add to or take away from our goals? Does this put us closer to what we're working towards? Does it take us further?
Right.
Does it line up with what we're trying to do next and the desires that we have for our life? And, we had some conversations about that recently where we realized that, if we went one way with, a decision, it would have been better for some other areas of life with our time, but it would not have been good for our finances. And it would
there were a few other things, yeah.
Well, yeah, and it would not have, it just wouldn't have lined up with other goals that we have of what we're working towards in life.
Yeah.
And so there are those kinds of things where we had to have those decisions and say, this is actually taking away from what we're working towards. And so it's not the best decision for us.
Yeah. And especially if you are a believer, like you mentioned earlier, make sure to pray through these things together. Take individual time and or pray together. But don't forget to do the very practical things. Like you need both.
Yeah.
You need to seek the Lord, but you also need to do the practical. If you're a pros cons person, write out a pros cons list. Like, well, actually, it's probably wise to do even if you don't naturally do that. But just remember that they go hand in hand. You don't just pray about it and not think about anything.
Right.
And you don't think about anything and just never seek the Lord about it. Like you need both.
Yeah.
And also trusting your spouse's leading. Because there have been conversations or decisions we've had to make where one of us felt very strongly and the other one was kind of like, I don't know. Like when we look at all the practical things, it's fine either way. When I pray about it, I don't really have a sense one way or the other. But the other person has a very strong sense of yes or no or whatever it is. And so that's where, as a spouse, you have to trust that your spouse is hearing from the Lord. And even though you're like, it's not that you're not necessarily on board, you're just kind of like, I don't know either way. And that's where you just kind of have to trust and walk in agreement that you're hearing from the Lord or I'm hearing from the Lord. And that's the route we're going to take. And just touching on agreement real quick, we can go into that in another conversation maybe, but
Yeah.
because that's a big thing in marriage. But where there's agreement, and praise God, we've had so many amazing couples who have poured this into us, but just the agreement is so important as a married couple. And that doesn't mean, well, I don't agree with you, but okay, I'm gonna agree with you and we'll just do it your way. That's not what I mean. I mean, like, you might be completely 100% on the same page. That's great. But sometimes agreement is what I was just describing, where you feel really strongly and I genuinely don't have a preference, but I'm going to hop on board with you. Or I might have some hesitation, but it's not enough to be a complete no. So I'm going to choose to hop on board with you and say, I trust you. We're going to do this. We're going to go in this direction. And I really believe there's grace on that decision, even if it's the quote unquote wrong decision. I believe there's grace on that decision when you are walking in agreement with each other. And we've experienced that for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Do we want to hop into this other question?
No, I think we need to stick around and come back for another episode where we continue on a conversation similar to this that's going into a little more specific story of ours relating to this. Yep. You have any final thoughts before we wrap this up?
Any other final thoughts I have, I can say in that for that other question.
Great.
In the next episode.
All right. Well, we will save it for that episode. Be sure to come back and listen to that one. We have no idea what it's going to be titled yet, so just keep an eye out. But it'll be a fun conversation. I will wrap this up here with a the questions for humans card. We love these cards just because they're fun. They're from Dr. John Deloney from Ramsey Solutions. We love these cards. There's just a fun way to be intentional with your spouse or your friends or whatever. This is from the couples edition since we're married.
Just some outside the box questions sometimes. Yeah.
And so this question to Amy is
both of us, right?
Sure. This is a pretty easy answer, I think. But which one of us would survive longer on a deserted island?
Well, skills-wise, you. In terms of but I think you might go crazy because you're bored out of your mind. Whereas I'm if I have one tree where I don't burn to a crisp, I'll twiddle my thumbs and just look at the sky and watch clouds all day and I'll be happy. And
but
I don't know
means that you're not out getting food. And
no, I'm just saying I'd be content being by myself.
Oh.
No, I would try to survive. I'm just saying you have more survival skills than I do. So in that sense, you'd probably last longer. But I would be the most content, I think, on a deserted island.
I guess.
But I guess to answer the question, survival-wise, probably you. I would figure it out.
Actually, it would...
I'd be motivated enough. I'd be like, Jesus, take me now. I'm fine either way. Either way is fine.
I'd take care of you.
Oh, if we were there together, for sure. Oh, I thought it was if I was alone.
I don't know.
Oh, no. If we're together, we're sticking it out, babe. We will figure this thing out. We're not going anywhere.
This is true. So we'll figure it out. Survival. It's a doozy.
What?
I don't know. I don't know what I'm saying. My eyes twitching, my eyes itching. I don't know. It's weird.
Bless your heart. Oh my
Anyways, so thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of the Intentional Life Podcast. Be sure to check out our social media. Be sure to fill out the Google form in the link in case you have a question that you want to hear us talk about on here. In the meantime, I'm AJ Selby.
I'm Amy Selby.
And this is the Intentional Life Podcast.